Hello and welcome to another episode of Unreleased or Unobtainable, a series where I either look at games that were never released or are extremely expensive because they're rare and were sold in limited quantities. This is achieved through the miracle that is emulation, since a lowly YouTuber like myself cannot afford the thousands of dollars that Unobtainables go for, and because the unreleased are simply that. Today, we're delving into the big bad world of 5th generation Superman games. You've undoubtedly heard of Superman 64, otherwise known as Superman, the new Superman Adventures, but did you know there was an unreleased PlayStation version? Superman 64 is infamously bad, but there's a story behind every flop, and while Superman 64s could arguably fill a separate video, the short of it directly affects the doomed PlayStation port. Superman 64 was a hotly anticipated release in 1999. Co-founder of Titus Interactive, Eric Kahn, talked up the game massively towards its release, but what was really going on behind the scenes sounds nothing short of chaotic. It all started with him picking up the license from Warner Bros. And DC Comics, as they were developing an animated TV series on the IP. Development of the game continued, but as time went on, his contacts at Warner Bros. Changed, and their replacements were much more constrictive of the IP. This caused relations to sour and delays to the release of the game, which ultimately ended in a rushed product. Reviews were extremely critical, even labeling it as one of the worst games ever made at the time, making it notorious in the modern day. Everything was exacerbated by Kahn's continuous promises to throwing oil onto the fire. However, while it is perceived as a failure, it did sell 500,000 copies, so at least the bank was rolling in. It's during this period the PlayStation version began development. Titus handed the duty over to Blue Sky Software, whom they were the parent company of. Blue Sky had decades of releases under their belt, including the Vectorman series on Sega Genesis, so were competent in taking on the project. Reportedly, they were 90% complete with development when the plug was pulled. Even though Sony had approved the game and pre-orders were being filled since advertising had begun, the license with Warner Bros. Expired, and that was that. The renewal was not granted, and whoosh, never to be seen again for about 10 more years. But before we get into how the curious among us today can play it, how does it actually play? The storyline is a bit of an unknown. While there is an intro video packed to the brim with different characters, scenarios, and happenings, there is not a single cutscene to be found elsewhere in the game. I guess these are part of the alleged missing 10%. Regardless, the point of the levels is very standard when it comes to Superman. Lex Luthor and his evil companions are up to no good, and it's your job to be super while avoiding whatever kryptonite trap they've set. The ultimate goal is to save hapless civilians caught in the crossfire while destroying robots. Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen will appear in select levels too, who physically need to be carried out even though they seem able-bodied and unhurt. It's a bit pathetic really. And yes, the enemies are robots. That's one of the constraints put on the developers by Warner Bros. Partly because of the Columbine shooting, it would seem, but also because they didn't want Superman portrayed as hurting people, even though he did it in the comics all the time. Speaking of hurting things, Superman has several powers at his disposal. For one, he has super minty breath, which can freeze things. This is mostly to stop machinery from working so doors open, etc. He also has a laser beam that emits from his eye holes that is handy for blowing up robot scum. There's 180-degree freedom to blast things, more or less, but it's annoying that you can't move around while laser beaming. You're stuck on the spot, which leaves you open to be shot at. The camera also doesn't pan as you're laser beaming from left or to right, making it even trickier to mow down a moving target as they run out of view. Although if all else fails, you can simply punch the enemies. Superman has fists too, I guess. There's our super run power too, which is difficult to time, but only seems to be used to break down walls or doors after they've been temporarily weakened by minty breath or freaking laser beams. I figured out later on that you can just usually punch these surfaces too, which is much easier. Lastly, there's an X-ray vision, so you can see what's on the other side of a locked door, although I struggled to find a real use for it. These powers are used to destroy an incredibly dim robot workforce. The laser beaming would get a bit tiresome at times, so I'd change it up by running up to them and throwing punches. About a third of the time, they wouldn't react at all, simply allowing their fate without resistance. That's a bit lame, although we should remember it's not a finished product. If an enemy does get one in on you, however, their weapons are kryptonite based, so you'll temporarily lose your powers. There are also traps made out of kryptonite energy that will do the same thing. You can still throw punches during this period with reduced power, but a health bar is introduced. It's only during this period that you can possibly die. He is the Man of Steel, I guess. That's not to say you can't fail, however. Some hostage missions will be timed for unknown reasons, I'm guessing purely so you can fail. The hostages sometimes give you items once you rescue them, although this mechanic wasn't used very much. In the initial garage level, the hostages give out keys for a door, although you can only carry one at a time. Annoyingly, you have to retrieve a key, use it on the door, and then backtrack for another key and repeat the process over and over until the door is unlocked. The levels are quite small, so backtracking is used to add more game time, and I've never really been a fan of that. It's boring. The graphics are a highlight, however, although you may have noticed that all the levels are indoors. The reason behind this is that the PlayStation supposedly couldn't handle the open world flying levels of the N64 version. It's not like anyone was missing those anyway, but the excuse is that Metropolis is covered in some sort of kryptonite fog, keeping our latex wearing friend inside. It works well, even if it does make flying unnecessary most of the time. Otherwise, there isn't much else to say. The music and sound bites are a bit repetitive, and the checkpoint system is lacking, but since you're playing through emulation anyway, the latter isn't such an issue. Superman on the PS1 has its flaws, but it isn't a bad game, especially when you consider the possibility of minor issues being ironed out before a 100% complete release. It's miles ahead of its N64 predecessor, that's for sure. So, it's 2021, and we can play a mostly complete Superman game on PS1. But how is this so? Well, footage of the game has actually been on the internet since 2011. A website and its companion YouTube channel, the PlayStation Museum, uploaded a 7.5 long video showing a demo. Everything shown matches the latest build I used for this video, except for the space level, which I will touch upon in a moment. It's never explained where PlayStation Museum obtained this demo from, and as far as I can tell, you can't download it. This was the only proof of the game's existence until January 2014, when a post was made on the now defunct Assemblers forum. User, R. Mandel, claimed he had received a CDR of a build dated to the 22nd of June 2000 in an eBay auction along with some other unreleased games. Unfortunately for all of us, he was a bit hostile in his reveal of the build. He was promising a data dump for the users of the forum to verify his find, although this is never explained further, but he was very adamant about never releasing the ROM. Instead, he intended to keep it for what he referred to as trade bait. Understandably, this upset a few other forum members. On one hand, he did pay for it originally, so I guess he was entitled to some sort of compensation for publicly releasing the ROM, but it sucks when someone says they are in possession of something that's historically important in gaming, and at the same time are very adamant in keeping it all to themselves. It comes off as kind of selfish, and coupled with his original unfriendly post, resulted in him being flamed. As a result, R. Mandel replied with a passive-aggressive post stating he was sorry he brought up the subject, and since he interpreted some replies as saying they thought the game was worthless anyway, he claimed to have then snapped the CDR in half and then deleted his only backup ISO file. Yikes. So take that as you will, but starting in the February of the same year, YouTuber Okaji Dragon released a 3-part video series showing footage of that same June 22nd build. The uploader cited his source as anonymous, so it's anyone's guess if it's a coincidence that the build is the same date as R. Mandel's supposedly snapped CDR. As we'll soon see, it does appear this is the latest build, so another source isn't unlikely. Regardless, this is the last we'd see of this particular build for quite a few years. In the September of 2018, a different build was showcased through the YouTube channel and website GameRave TV. This build was dated the 29th of October 1999, and while this also came from a mystery supplier, luckily for us, this was uploaded to archive.org for all to enjoy. Being dated earlier to the June 22nd 2000 build, it is less polished and also includes developer tools. Some levels also aren't seen in the later build, such as a subway, a space station, a completely different garage level, and a boss fight that doesn't have a boss. Each level also includes a time limit, with pickups to be found that add time as you progress through the level. I'm thankful they scrapped that idea. Notably, the X-ray vision is also missing, but that's okay since I never used it anyway. Instead of the pause screen, the start menu prompts a developer menu where you can select a level, play sounds, open doors, change the camera angle, with one mode bizarrely called a dad cam, along with a bunch of other menu options I barely understand. It's cool to see and have access to, but it pales in comparison to the lure of a more complete build that was possibly out there. In the November of 2020, R. Mandel pops up again, but this time, of all places, on DeviantArt. Now going by the handle of Digital Explorations, in a long, now deleted blog post, he explains the drama on the Assembler forums years before and his motives for snapping the disc. As you can probably imagine by now, he's very defensive of his actions, even going as far to say he would do it again. But all of that aside, the point of the blog post was to announce that he was finally releasing the June 2000 build for free, even though he apparently deleted his backups years before. His answer to the obvious question you might have was that he came across some old hard drives while cleaning that he had originally intended to sell after upgrading. Even though they had been formatted, he realised that these were the hard drives from the Assembler forum days, and it occurred to him that the ISO might still be recoverable. Using a program called iCare Data Recovery, he successfully extracted the ROM and uploaded it to Mediafire for the benefit of everyone. Say what you will about the man, but at least he delivered in the end. Even though that DeviantArt post is now deleted and the original download link dead, it's very easy to obtain the build through other websites and is what I use for the review portion of this video. You have to wonder if Blue Sky foresaw such drama when they were unable to finish the game in the early 2000s. Unlikely, and sadly, they went out of business a short time later after 3 decades of operation. But the point is that anyone can now enjoy its full history in the modern day, and that's how it should be. I get that it's fair that some sort of compensation should be expected if they paid through the nose to obtain the prototype on an auction site like eBay, but at the same time, it sucks that we all don't get to enjoy and benefit from the history. It's a complex argument, but who knows what historic gold is looming in private collections around the globe. I just want to end this video by giving a quick shout out to my modded PlayStation Classic, which produced all the game footage you see in this video. I recently covered the modding process in another video, and it's well worth doing if you want some further use out of the failed mini console. It played everything without an issue. Additionally, if you have any requests for future episodes of this series, please feel free to leave them in the comments section. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.